For 20 years, the stars had been quiet. The Treaty of T-Varane, signed in the ashes of a long and bloody war, had kept peace between humanity and the Deathworlder coalition, an alliance of powerful alien races born on the most dangerous planets in the galaxy. These were not peaceful creatures. Their worlds were full of lava rivers, acid storms, poisonous jungles, and creatures that could tear through armor like paper. The Varnock had claws like swords. The Draxenhive had minds that could control fleets without speaking. The Krathel hunted for sport, even among their own kind. But for 2 decades, there was calm. Humanity, once the newcomers to galactic politics, had earned their place after surviving Earth's brutal history and building cities among the stars. Colonies grew. Trade flowed. There was even talk of humans joining the Galactic Council's core members, a position that had never been offered before to a young race. But all of that ended on a cold, silent morning near the Outer Rim. Captain Mara Redding stood on the command bridge of the Resolute, one of the most advanced Terran strike carriers ever built. She was doing routine patrol checks around the Helios system, where over 3 billion humans lived across 7 planets. The Helios colonies were peaceful, full of scientists, farmers, and families. Children played in artificial gravity parks. Massive solar towers powered whole cities. They had no weapons, no defenses. Why would they? The treaty had held. Until now. At exactly 4:17 Galactic Standard Time, sensors picked up something odd. A massive energy spike near Helios 4. Then another. Then dozens more. Before Mara could even ask for a scan, the sky outside the window turned bright white. The first wave of attacks came from cloaked Varna cruisers, ships that had hidden in the darkness just outside sensor range. They launched plasma torpedoes at orbital stations, cutting them into pieces in seconds. Communication relays went down. Civilian transport ships were caught in the crossfire. Then came the Draxen assault units, dropping from high orbit directly onto city centers. They didn't ask for surrender. They didn't send a warning. They just landed and began to burn. Fire filled the skies. Buildings collapsed. People screamed across every open channel. Mara watched it all from her ship, frozen for just a moment. She had fought in battles before. She had seen death. But this was something else. It wasn't war. It was extermination. She ordered her crew to prepare for immediate counterattack, but the Resolute was too far out to help. By the time they reached Helios 4's orbit, the planet's surface was already dark and quiet, lit only by the glowing trails of burning cities. There were no enemy ships left. The Deathworlders had vanished into the void, leaving only destruction behind. Reports came in from the other Helios planets. The pattern was the same. Total silence. Entire populations wiped out. No survivors. No warning. Back on Earth, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. The Deathworlder Coalition claimed it was a military accident, blaming rogue commanders and unstable AI systems. But no one believed them. Not after so many simultaneous attacks. Not after the clear coordination and deadly precision. Humanity had been betrayed, and everyone knew it. The Council, bound by old rules and fragile politics, hesitated. Some members suggested investigation. Others warned against overreaction. But humans had already seen enough. On every human broadcast, across every screen and ship, a single image spread like fire: the burning remains of New Terra, Helios 4's capital city, where over 80 million had lived. It was nothing but a black crater now. Captain Mara Redding returned to Earth days later, not as a soldier asking for orders, but as a witness demanding justice. She walked into the high command chamber in full armor, helmet tucked under one arm, face grim and scarred from years of war. "We gave peace," she said, her voice calm and cold, "and they answered with fire." The room was silent. Everyone knew what came next. The president of the Terran Alliance gave one nod, and with that, the order was passed. No more talks. No more patience. Humanity would respond. Not with diplomacy. Not with delay. they would strike back with everything they had. Mara was given command of Task Force Iron Vow, a fleet built for one purpose: punishment. The name itself was a message, an oath, a promise. The treaty was dead, buried in the ashes of Helios. Now, humanity would remind the galaxy why Earth had once been called the cradle of monsters, not because of the beasts that lived there, but because of the humans who had survived it. As the Resolute left Earth's orbit once again, Mara stood at the window, watching her homeworld shrink behind her. She remembered the peaceful days, the years of hope. They were gone now. Mercy was gone. And somewhere in the darkness, the Deathworlders would soon learn what happened when humans fought with nothing left to lose. The silence of space was cold, endless, and full of anger as Task Force Iron Vow moved like a shadow toward the outer rim, carrying with it the weight of 3 billion dead and the promise of a revenge that would not be delayed. Captain Mara Redding stood once more on the command bridge of the Resolute, her eyes focused not on the stars ahead, but on the flickering image of their target, Xeric 9, a volcanic moon and one of the main strongholds of the Varnock species, buried deep inside enemy territory. This moon wasn't just a base, it was a fortress built inside a living planet, with rivers of fire and walls made from obsidian and steel. The Varnock had trained generations of warriors there, creatures bred for war and raised without mercy, each one stronger and more violent than the last. It was here that the first orders to destroy Helios had been given. It was here that Mara would strike first. No diplomacy, no warning, just war. As the human fleet approached, sensors picked up heavy defense grids around the moon, hundreds of auto turrets, long-range plasma cannons, and thick shield layers powered by deep-core reactors. Any normal attack would have failed before it even began. But Mara had studied every inch of Xeric 9, every known weakness, and a few no one else had seen. She didn't send her ships in a straight line. She used asteroid shadows, electromagnetic storms, and timed bursts of radiation to mask their approach. At 300 hours, when the local sun dipped below the horizon and the Varnock systems were at their weakest, she gave the signal. Human ships dropped from stealth in perfect formation, and the first wave of railgun fire ripped through the silence like thunder. The outer defense rings were shredded in seconds. Explosions lit up the black surface of Xeric 9 like lightning storms, and the moon screamed in response. Hundreds of Varnock fighters launched from hangars, but they were met with a wall of human missiles guided by AI so advanced it could predict enemy moves before they were made. Within minutes, the skies above the moon turned into a firestorm, and still the humans pressed forward. Mara didn't stay on the bridge. She led the drop team herself. Clad in black exo-armor, with a plasma rifle in hand, she touched down on the surface of Xeric 9 at the front of the assault line, followed by shock troopers and combat drones. The ground beneath her boots was hot enough to melt steel, but the suits held. The team moved fast, pushing through tunnels carved in volcanic stone, where the Varnock had stored weapons, fuel, and prisoners, some of them human, most of them unrecognizable, broken things left to rot in darkness. They freed the prisoners they could, then moved deeper, reaching the core command center where the enemy generals had hidden. The Varnock didn't beg. They fought with claws and acid and blades made from their own bones. But they were not ready for this. Not ready for soldiers who had grown up on Earth, who had trained in storms and deserts, who had faced extinction more than once and come out stronger. The humans didn't fight for territory. They didn't want control. They came for justice, and every enemy in their way fell. The final explosion came when Mara reached the central reactor chamber. She set a charge herself, made sure it was done right. As the countdown began, she looked around the black stone walls. This place, once a symbol of power, would soon be nothing but molten ash. The team evacuated just in time. From orbit, the Resolute watched the surface of Xeric 9 crack open like an egg. Lava burst through bunkers, towers collapsed into fire, and the sky turned red. The moon didn't explode, but it burned, and that was enough. A message was sent across every channel, broadcast on every frequency the Deathworlders used. Helios was only the beginning. Now we answer. The galaxy watched in silence. Some alien leaders were stunned. The Deathworlder coalition had always believed that humans, with their peaceful cities and love for diplomacy, were soft, that they wouldn't survive real war. They believed Earth was weak because it had chosen peace. But now they saw the truth. Earth had chosen peace not because it was weak, but because it knew what would happen if it unleashed its true strength. The Varnock survivors limped back to their allies, their pride broken, their voices shaking. For the first time in over 100 years, a Deathworlder species had lost its home base to an enemy strike. And not just any enemy, humans. The message spread quickly, not just through reports, but through whispers in council chambers, on black market comms, in military networks across every system. The humans have changed. The treaty is gone. Mercy is gone. Some alien leaders started to panic. Others began to arm their fleets. But the fear was already there, growing fast, because everyone knew that if humanity had come this far in just 2 decades of peace, no one could guess how far they would go in war. And Mara, sitting once more in the command seat of the Resolute, didn't smile, didn't speak, didn't rest. She simply pointed to the next target on the map, another Deathworlder colony that had helped plan the Helios attack, and gave the order to move. One by one, they would fall. Not because humans loved war, but because the enemy had reminded them of what they were capable of. And now that the fire was lit, there would be no stopping it. The explosion in the Ravian Belt had been more than a military strike. It was a signal to the galaxy that humanity had crossed a line, and from that moment forward, mercy was no longer part of the mission. Across the stars, the Ashborn's name became legend and warning alike, whispered by traitors, feared by spies, and studied by frightened generals who once believed humans could be reasoned with. But now, the broken pieces of the Deathworlder coalition had begun to understand the truth. Earth was no longer interested in negotiations, treaties, or slow diplomacy. It was cleansing the stars, one system at a time. The Draxan, after their core node was destroyed, retreated into silence again, their hive disrupted, their psychic web fractured, but Mara Redding knew better than to think they were gone. She had seen the eyes of the humans trapped inside their machines, wired, broken, used like tools, and the image never left her. The Ashborn returned to the shadows, their fleet growing as more defectors, veterans, and even exiled aliens joined them. Some were from species that once served the coalition but had no more faith in its promises. Others had seen firsthand what the humans had become, and, instead of running, chose to fight beside them, not for survival, but for vengeance. Mara didn't turn anyone away. She knew this war had outgrown flags and uniforms. It was now a battle between those who believed in justice and those who had buried it under ashes. And yet, despite all the victories, something darker was growing, something cold inside the humans themselves. On the world of Erin's Fall, where a Varnock science colony had continued forbidden experiments long after Azarak IX's destruction, the Ashborn found laboratories filled with cages not just with animals or prisoners, but with mutated hybrids, weapons made from harvested DNA, including human genetic material. The Varnock had tried to create soldiers from human parts, mixing their strength with Deathworld biology, crafting silent killers with no souls. The labs were destroyed, the data burned, and every scientist executed without trial. There was no hesitation, no discussion, just fire and steel. That day, Mara gave a new order that spread through all Ashborn ships: no more prisoners. If a facility was found supporting the Deathworlders, it would be cleansed completely. The rules of engagement were rewritten in fire. Even Earth's high command began to worry. A message was sent directly to Mara, warning her that some political leaders feared her actions would lead to full-scale extermination, that her image had grown too powerful, too independent. But she didn't respond. Not with words. Instead, she released the files from Erin's Fall to the public. The photos, the recordings, the experiments. And when the people of Earth saw what had been done in the name of the coalition, their fear turned to fury. Protests erupted, not against Mara, but against delay, against hesitation, demanding the war be taken further. Earth's leaders realized too late that they no longer controlled the war. The people did. And the people had chosen fire. While governments argued, Mara planned the next move. She knew where the final command nodes of the Varnock still hid deep beneath the surface of Nemeris Prime, a green jungle planet that looked harmless on the surface but was a fortress of death below. The Varnock had built massive underground tunnels there, filled with traps, beasts, and soldiers trained from birth in absolute darkness. But the Ashborn were ready. They had developed tunneling mechs, heat-dampened armor, and drones that could navigate without light. The invasion wasn't loud. It was a ghost war. Teams slipped in under cover of jungle storms, planting charges, sabotaging power cores, cutting off communication systems before the first alert could be raised. By the time the Varnock realized what was happening, half their power grid was down, and their security systems were blind. The rest didn't last long. What followed was not a battle, it was a purge. Each corridor cleared room by room, the enemy taken down with silent shots or blade strikes, the kind of precise warfare that didn't come from hatred, but from something colder. Discipline. Purpose. By the time Mara walked into the central control chamber of Nemeris Prime, the war for that planet was already over. She found the last Varnock commanders hiding behind blast shields, begging for mercy, promising secrets, trade, even surrender. But she said nothing. She simply activated the gravity collapse device her engineers had prepared and left. The chamber was crushed into dust and silence. News of Nemeris Prime's fall spread across the known systems, not just because another world had been taken, but because of how it had been done without a single human casualty, without warning, without conversation. The message was clear: humanity had stopped asking questions. It had stopped explaining. It was delivering justice in the only language the galaxy now understood. The Deathworlder remnants began to scatter. Some went into hiding. Others turned on each other, desperate to escape before humanity reached them. But no corner of space was far enough. The Ashborn's network had grown, and their reach extended into places even the old Earth fleets had never touched. They had spies, allies, former enemies working together now, not for money or orders, but because they knew that if the Ashborn arrived, something evil would be erased. And yet, in all this fire and fury, Mara Redding began to feel the weight pressing in. She didn't show it, not to her crew, not to the soldiers who followed her. But late at night, in the quiet of her quarters, she sometimes stared at old photographs of Earth before the war, of Helios before its fall. She wondered what might have happened if the treaty had held, if the warning signs hadn't been ignored. But those thoughts never lasted. Not anymore. Because the galaxy had made its choice. And now it had to live with what it awakened. In orbit above a broken Deathworlder moon, she stood once again on the bridge, looking at the stars, her voice steady as she gave the next order. No hesitation. No pause. Begin the next operation, she said, and the fleet moved like a storm. In the stars, the words spread. Mercy is gone. The galaxy had gone quiet, not in peace, but in fear, the kind of silence that comes when the wildest beasts finally understand that something stronger now walks the stars. Planet by planet, system by system, the Deathworlder coalition had crumbled under the relentless advance of humanity and the Ashborn. Their proud war fleets had been reduced to wreckage floating in the void, their generals killed, their strongholds broken like dry stone under steel. And now, only the last of the old rulers remained, the ancient Deathworlder lords who had never been seen, only whispered about, beings who ruled not by force alone, but through secrets, ancient technology, and fear passed down through generations. They lived in the fortress world of Dothargul, a dying star system surrounded by radiation storms and minefields from a forgotten war. No one had reached it in centuries. But Mara Redding was not just anyone. She stood now aboard the Ashborn's Wrath, her flagship forged from the remains of 3 fallen enemy cruisers, rebuilt with human precision and powered by experimental dark matter cores, silent and deadly. Her eyes scanned the cursed red light of the Dothargul system, where Deathworlder defense stations began activating like old machines waking from nightmares. But she did not flinch. Around her, dozens of Ashborn ships decloaked, forming a tight formation, their weapons charged, their shields humming with deadly energy. The message had already been sent: surrender or be erased. But no answer came. Of course, it didn't. The ancient Deathworlder lords still believed they could outlast, outthink, or scare humanity into backing down. They thought wrong. The fleet began its advance, weaving through traps, dodging plasma fields, hacking into centuries-old systems that never expected an enemy like this: fast, silent, unmerciful. Ashborn boarding parties launched into the dark underbelly of the orbital ring stations, clearing out defenders with brutal precision. There was no glory, no shouting, no celebration, only the sound of boots, the quiet hum of energy rifles, and the final gasps of enemies who had once called themselves conquerors. Deeper within the fortress, hidden bunkers activated last resort systems, launching sleeper drones and virus storms across the net, trying to cripple the attackers with confusion. But the Ashborn had seen worse. They had fought the Draxan Hive. They had survived Varnock monsters. They had burned through shadow worlds where even light refused to shine. Nothing in this fortress was new or surprising. Everything here felt like a memory of a war already lost. As the battle above raged, Mara led her own strike team down to the surface, landing near the ancient throne spire where the last Deathworlder lords gathered in desperation. It was a black tower rising from a sea of ash, guarded by machines built from bones and metal, but even these horrors cracked under the Ashborn's push. Floor by floor, room by room, the humans advanced, until finally Mara stood before the inner sanctum, a vast chamber lit by glowing symbols older than most civilizations, with tall thrones carved from obsidian and iron. On them sat the lords, not gods, not monsters, but broken things wearing masks of power. Their armor was cracked. Their voices trembled. For the first time in known history, the Deathworlders were afraid. One of them, taller than the rest, stepped forward, speaking in a dozen languages at once, trying to confuse, trying to manipulate, offering secrets, technology, even worlds untouched by war. But Mara said nothing. She simply raised her weapon and fired, not to kill, but to break the throne behind him into pieces. The message was clear. There would be no deals, no forgiveness, no future built on old lies. The lords fell to their knees, one by one, not from pain, but because they had finally accepted the truth they had lost. Not just the war, but the myth they had built for thousands of years. The myth that they were the strongest, the wildest, the rulers of the stars. That illusion was gone now, shattered by the one thing they never understood: human will. Mara ordered the chamber cleared, the technology taken, and the lords sent to trial, not in secret halls, but on Earth, live for all to see. They would answer for Helios, for Aaron's fall, for every child taken, every city erased. And they would do it kneeling. Across the galaxy, the effect was instant. Resistance ended. Hidden fleets surrendered. Whole species that once followed the Deathworlders sent messages of apology, offering reparations and begging for inclusion in the new peace. Earth's flag flew high over worlds that had once laughed at its weakness. Now, no one laughed. Even the Draxan, silent and cold, sent a simple message from deep space: we will not resist. We request no pursuit. Mara didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. In time, historians would call it the Great Reckoning. The day the old order ended, and humanity took its place not just as a survivor, but as a judge, a force that came not to conquer, but to correct. The Ashborn disbanded in silence, their ships returned to secret ports, their warriors fading into legend, marked by tattoos, scars, and memories no archive could ever fully record. As for Mara, she returned to Earth not in triumph, but in quiet. She refused medals, refused a seat on the new council. Instead, she walked the gardens of Helios Memorial Park, where the names of the fallen were carved into a wall that stretched for miles. There, she stood alone, whispering no words, because the dead needed no speeches. They had been avenged. And in the sky above, for the first time in 100 years, the stars seemed calm. The war was over. The Deathworlders had knelt, and the galaxy would never rise the same again.